What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the Detroit Lions' future a little bit. We're going to be talking about where are we 2 years from now? Where are we in 2022? And we're going to touch on how the Detroit Lions could be in a really good spot for 2022 and what that could mean for this year's draft and what positions they target. So let's get it started.
You know, I got to shout out DoseOfDion, man, because it was actually the first time I went live on YouTube. And, you know, guys don't know, DoseOfDion, he put out a lot of good content for the Detroit Lions.
Welcome everybody to a video. Glad you guys are here. And as we're talking about the future a little bit for Detroit, but don't worry. This does affect this year's draft because when you draft players, you can't only look for just this season and the upcoming year, but you also have to look down the road. And that's what the Detroit Lions could be doing with this year's draft. And the Lions did exactly what they set out to do. They signed free agents to compete, to fill out positions, to allow them to basically draft best player available. That way they don't have to focus on a certain positional group because it's a need. And that's exactly what they did. At every position, they seemingly signed players to just fill out the roster. There's not one position where they went like overboard and they signed like huge names. They let all the guys from the Detroit Lions that were getting any kind of, multiple year contract, they let them go. They brought in a whole bunch of one-year deals. The only multiple-year deal they signed, aside from Romeo Okwara on the 3-year deal, was Jamal Williams, who got a 2-year, $6 million deal. Everything else was a 1-year deal from the Detroit Lions this offseason. So they did exactly what they said they would do. And the Detroit Lions told us, Brad Holmes told us, where are we 2 years from now? So this is a 2-year plan, you could say, for the Detroit Lions. And today we're going to take a look at the future a little bit, just a little bit. I know there's a lot of things that could change between now and then. And of course, the Lions have to try to compete this season because, once you step in as a head coach, as a general manager, the clock is ticking. You got to be successful. Doesn't mean you have to go to the Super Bowl or anything like playoffs or something like that, but you got to show improvement. If you don't, hey, you never know what could happen, right? You never know if you're going to get that second year. So you got to make it happen as soon as you step in the building. But there is clearly a little plan the Lions have here and that they're going towards here. Now, this offseason was rough. You had the COVID and not a lot of, players are taking multiple year deals. And in a weird way, this could have worked out as a blessing in disguise for the Detroit Lions because it kind of leveled the playing field in a weird way. In an offseason where teams are struggling to give, big deals out to really improve their team, to find multiple year contracts, the Detroit Lions, who didn't have much money to spend anyways, are kind of like, well, we were going to do this anyway. We were going to just sign 1-year deals. So it kind of leveled the playing field a little bit until next year when the salary cap is expected to boom to over $200 million, 203 to be exact. And the Detroit Lions are set up to have some money to spend next offseason. Today's video, I wanted to talk about the future, but also talk about this year's draft and certain positions because even though they're set up to take best player available, there are certain positional groups the Lions could target in this year's draft because of how long it takes to develop those certain positions to put themselves in the best spot to be successful in 2022. So the first part of this equation, I think, is the quarterback position. And that's, of course, Jared Goff. Now, this is going to be the year for the Detroit Lions to evaluate Jared Goff, to see where Jared Goff is at and really make the decision on whether or not they're going forward with Jared Goff as their quarterback. And that also has something to do with the 1-year deals they gave out. They don't exactly know what player they're building this team for, what they're building around, who they're building around until they know who their quarterback is. And they may have that in Jared Goff, but this is going to be the year where the Detroit Lions are going to evaluate Jared Goff. Doesn't mean they can't draft a quarterback this year, but there's a very high chance Goff is going to head into the season as the starter. I don't think they'll draft a quarterback, but they could. You never know with John Dorsey. I don't think they will, though, but this is the year for Jared Goff to really prove whether or not he can be the quarterback going forward because he's already getting paid that franchise money. And with the out 2 years from now, this is Jared Goff's time. So I think the first thing when it comes to evaluating and figuring out who your quarterback is, you got to make sure that you have a good enough situation for him to be in. It doesn't mean you have the best situation because that just ain't going to happen with how much money you had this offseason, but giving him enough pieces to realistically evaluate where the quarterback is. If he's in an awful situation, a team that can't run at all, and they have no weapons whatsoever, then how in the world are you going to know how good Jared Goff is? And I don't think Jared Goff is a great quarterback, but we know that he can win when things are going well around him, which is, obviously something that the Lions haven't figured out how to do is make things go well around the quarterback position. They haven't figured it out. I want to figure out how can you put him in a position to basically be successful so we can get a true evaluation of this is should this be our quarterback going forward, and should we continue to, build around this guy? Because next offseason, when that's all kicks off. So to me, this is kind of like a feeling out year, not only for Jared Goff, but also for every position: wide receiver, linebacker, what guys are going to fit, what guys are not going to fit. Is Jalen Reese-Maybin going to fit? Is Alex Anzalone going to fit? Is Delani Tavai going to fit? Are these safeties, Tracy Walker, who is going to be here next season? This is kind of that feeling out year. What the Lions have done before, where the head coach comes in and they just blow everything up right away, you kind of feel it out a little bit. You see what you got here first. And a lot of teams do that. And that's what the Detroit Lions, to me, are going to be doing this offseason. So starting off with the quarterback position first, Jared Goff, you first got to ask yourself, well, how do we get him in the best situation? The first thing is this. You look at the receivers. You take a look at the weapons. Now, the Rams have valued the receiver position in the past. As you can see from this chart, their top 3 receivers last season were a second-round pick, a third-round pick, and a fourth-round pick. Those were the top 3 receivers. So they have valued the receiver position, but you can see none of them are first-round picks, which makes sense because they don't really have first-round picks. So it makes sense. They have shown some value here. But now you talk about the Detroit Lions receiving core. Well, maybe they don't have core pieces right now. They do have talent at that position. You have a Jamal Williams who a couple years ago signed a 4-year, $44 million deal. That's a huge deal. Clearly, he has the talent, but he had an injury last season. Brashad Perriman was a first-round pick. Now, the issue with them is they've lacked consistency. Recently, Perriman's been much better, but they've had injuries. They've lacked consistency. But this is a season where they're going to have to prove themselves. So while a year down the road, none of these guys are going to be here, for this season, at least gives you a potential to evaluate with some talent. Now, I do believe the Lions should draft at least one receiver somewhere, probably in the top 3-4 rounds, to add some more talent, give Jared Goff even more help, and potentially find a core piece for Jared Goff. The Lions receiving group right now is not as good as it was when Matthew Stafford was here. I mean, not having Galladay, not having Jones, not having Amendola, that kind of thing. It's serviceable. It just isn't core pieces. However, for Jared Goff, what I think is actually more important than the receivers is the running game. That's the more important part for Jared Goff. And we saw that with the LA Rams. It's not necessarily that, hey, we need all these first-round receivers, because Goff wasn't winning, with all these first-round receivers. For Jared Goff, we need to be able to have a effective and respectable running game. If we don't have that, then Jared Goff struggles. And you can see it from this chart as well. Look at these stats from 2018. 2018 was when Jared Goff was kind of on top of the world, right? When I was Pro Bowl, I think it was a Pro Bowl year for him, and the Rams were 13-3. The guy has 32 touchdowns, 12 picks, 101.1 passer rating, 65% completion percentage. He's putting up these big time numbers, and we're like, man, Jared Goff, he's a future of this league. And then all of a sudden, 2019 and 2020 roll around, and you guys see the difference in yards per carry. It goes from 4.9 to 3.9 and 4.3, which is kind of the range the Lions have been hovering in for a long time. So for the Detroit Lions, what the focus for them should be is how do we make the run game more effective? And that's something that they should do this offseason to make sure that Goff has the best chance to be evaluated fairly this offseason. And the Detroit Lions have already taken the first step in the right direction, and that was signing Jamal Williams, the number 2 running back. Similar to what the Browns did when the Browns signed Kareem Hunt. You can see how I have the Browns thing on here. And the reason I have that is because the Browns did a similar thing. They went from being one of the worst teams to all of a sudden last season being 11-5, beating a playoff team in Pittsburgh Steelers, and nearly beating the Chiefs. Now, I know it was set up a little bit differently. You can see kind of similarities there with the Cleveland Browns. They had Nick Chubb, then they signed Kareem Hunt. They got their number 2 running back. Quarterback has a low success rate, which, we know because it's very difficult to transition. It can improve. Usually after 3 years, it's just, hey, where's our quarterback at? When you take a look at the running back position, that is the other extremely low success rate. It's tough to draft a running back, which I guess is a good thing. I say it's a good thing, but I guess that's an excuse for the Detroit Lions struggling to draft a running back for so long until really DeAndre Swift. And that makes it even make more sense, the fact that we signed a guy like Jamal Williams, because drafting a running back is tough. So instead of relying upon a running back that we drafted this year, that may have been a reason the Lions went with a guy like Jamal Williams, because we already know what he's about. And now the Detroit Lions just need to figure out if Kerryon's going to be the third or someone else is. But that's something they'll figure out down the road. However, this is Kerryon's last year, so this is the year to really just, hey, what are you about? And you could also see from the statistics here that the Cleveland Browns in 2019 had the 23rd ranked offensive line. They traded away Zeitler, and Robinson didn't play well at the other tackle position. So the next offseason, they said, hey, let's go out there and get these tackles figured out. They signed Jack Conklin. They draft Jedrick Wills. They both play well. And of course, they have the number 1 ranked offensive line. And it's no coincidence that this team goes from being 6-10 to 11-5 and winning a playoff game. I mean, there's no coincidence. It makes sense. The offensive line was really good. Defense was extremely balanced. They could run the ball, which opened up the pass. Same thing that we saw kind of with Ryan Tannehill winning with Tennessee. And even their defense was not that great last year. It was probably about average. I mean, in terms of pass defense being below average, or run defense being a little bit above average. And now the Detroit Lions Lions are in a better spot than that because they already have an above average offensive line. And if Big V shows improvement staying at guard, if Jonah Jackson shows improvement, this could be a top 10 offensive line already. Now the question will be for the Lions, do they want to try to upgrade that this season with potentially someone on the right side in this year's draft and really solidify the offensive line? And we'll get to that in a second. So that's what the Lions need to focus on. They did the first step, which was signing Jamal Williams. You have a running back that averaged 4.6 yards per carry, but last season, Matthew Stafford tied our second running back, Adrian Peterson, in yards per carry. That is a big problem. That's a very big problem. But now you have Jamal Williams. Now you have a serviceable number 2 running back behind an offensive line that's above average and that through 6 weeks was the best offensive line blocking in the league. Now, all of a sudden, you have something going here in the backfield, but you could solidify it. And then finally, you ask yourself, does he have the tight ends? This will be the best tight end that Goff has ever gotten to play with, and that's T.J. Hockenson, a Pro Bowler. He's had Everett, he's had Tyler Higbee, but I would definitely say neither of those 2 tight ends are as talented as what T.J. Hockenson is all around. Now, sure, that's 2 tight ends versus Hawkinson's 1, but we did sign Josh Hill. We do have Hunter Bryant. Hopefully, he can take a step, but it is the best tight end that Goff will have ever played with. And then, of course, the running back position. He's always had receptions come out of the backfield. Like I said, last season, only 41% of his passing yards came in the air. So it was a lot of yards after the catch. And one year, Todd Gurley led the Rams in terms of receptions. So for the Detroit Lions, they need to have guys on the backfield that can catch the ball. And that's exactly what we have. Swift has really nice hands. Of course, the Bears game was tough, but he's got good hands. And Jamal Williams is a phenomenal pass catcher. Heck, even Kerryon can catch the ball a little bit too. So now you have that box checked. So realistically, aside from adding another weapon in the draft for the receiver group, you should have a good enough supporting cast to evaluate where Goff is. A part of where are we 2 years from now, figuring out who your quarterback is. Either Goff then proves it or he doesn't before we start getting into this year's draft. And this basically is just a quick little diagram of what the Lions are looking like for 2022. And this is why I say the Lions could be potentially set up. Now, the Lions currently have the least amount of players under contract for 2022, which makes sense considering all the one-year deals they gave out. But they're also set up right now to have $47 million in cap space for 2022. By the way, they have $22 million in cap space right now, which is the 6th most in the NFL, which is pretty darn awesome, which means if a trade offer comes their way, if, they want to sign a player because he gets cut, the Lions have the money to do it. That's great. But for 2022, the Lions are set up to have $47 million in cap space, which is better than 2 teams in the NFC North for next year right now. Now, they do have the least amount of players under contract, but in terms of players that are hitting free agency next season or are no longer under contract for Detroit next year, if you look at those names on the left side, those are the biggest names. Not including the one-year deals. You see those names, you'll see that most of those guys probably won't be looking at a huge payday. Walker could look at some money if he takes a big jump this year. Frank Ragnall's a no-brainer. We're going to have to re-sign him. But aside from that, it's not like the Detroit Lions should have to, be completely broke trying to bring back players. So they still have a good amount of money left over next offseason, which could give them money to spend in free agency, which I don't expect them to completely do. But then you move towards the draft, and the Detroit Lions are looking at least 8 picks, but likely 11 picks, as they're set up to get a 3rd-round comp pick from Golladay because they didn't replace him, potentially a 5th-round comp pick, these are projected, for Marvin Jones Jr. because they didn't replace him, and maybe even a 6th-round draft pick for Jamal Agnew because they didn't replace that because they signed all winter deals, which would mean the Lions could have 11 picks in next year's draft compared to the rest of the NFC North, who's not looking at that. They could have the most draft capital in the NFC North next season, so they'd have money as well, the 2nd most, only behind Chicago, but Chicago doesn't even know if they have a quarterback or not, and the Lions could have that, and we know how difficult it is to find a quarterback. Just have Cleveland, who from 1999 to 2017 had 18 quarterbacks play that position. Okay, so if the Lions have their guy in Goff, I would take the Goff situation over what Chicago has going on right now any single day of the week. That's not to say Goff is the top quarterback, but it is to say we have a quarterback. At least we have one. See, the thing is that's unfortunate for this regime is that they stepped into a team last season that probably was about as bad as a 0-16 to 2-14 team, like Cleveland was when they were that bad. DeShone Kizer's your quarterback for the Lions last season. Do you think that the Detroit Lions last season how many games do you think the Lions would win last year if DeShone Kizer was our quarterback? Yeah, probably not many. Okay, maybe like 1, maybe we beat the Jags. That's the kind of team we were, but unfortunately the Lions don't get the number 1 pick. They get the 7th pick, which is why the Goff trade made so much sense because you're usually awarded with, the 1st pick in the draft, 2nd pick in the draft when you have a franchise bad defense and you can't run the ball aside from Swift, which again is why it's so important we got Jamal Williams and why the running game could actually be serviceable because Swift can run the football and we can run behind this offensive line. Now you can't improve that offensive line, but we didn't have a number 2. All right, Peterson should not have been our number 2 running back. That's the problem. I think they thought Kerryon would be, but he wasn't. So they went with AP, and AP became our number 1 until we gave Kerryon until we gave Swift the opportunity. Then Swift took over and it was like, okay, yeah, that's the guy. So now having the number 2 is very, very important. We needed to do that. Okay. So now that you guys see that we could be set up pretty nice for 2022 when you talk about salary cap, when you talk about draft picks, so where the Detroit Lions are in 2022. So what does that mean for this year? Because the plan is, where are we 2 years from now? So how do we approach this year's draft? When you draft, yeah, you're drafting them for the season, but you're looking ahead. You're looking at the bigger picture. You're not just saying, hey, we're drafting this guy, okay, how can he help us this season? You're saying, how can he help us next year? Because the Lions said they don't want to build through free agency. They want to build through the draft. That 4 years down the road, they re-sign these guys and they're their guys. So the Lions have to have that outlook. So if you're saying, where are we 2 years from now? Because, of course, the Lions won't get 4 years if they're not successful. Where are we 2 years from now? I'm going to show you this. These are the players that are currently under contract for the Lions in 2022, not including Frank. He's not, but I'm assuming we're going to re-sign him. As you can see, the certain positions that are very low. Linebacker, I have Tavai there, but Tavai, who even knows if he's going to be a scheme fit? Tavai, you got linebacker. Cornerback only has 2 with Okuda and Amani. They need to take a step forward, which they definitely could. Receiver is very low. You can see that as well. You even see safety, where you only have Will Harris because Tracy Walker is on the last year of his deal, where he's going to have to prove himself. It kind of shows you where the Lions have some players. Now, obviously, that's going to change. You're going to draft some guys next year and stuff like that. But just right now, where the Lions are looking ahead in the future. Side of the offensive line is a big question as well, because number one, Big V, well, I don't know. The Detroit Lions could exercise that out, save $4.2 million next offseason. Yes, do $4.2 in a dead cap, but they can save money if they don't want to keep him around. The fact that if Big V stays at right guard, then who's your right tackle? You either have to re-sign Crosby or you got to go somewhere else. And now we're going to talk about this year's draft. It's also a big year for Tracy Walker, as you can see, because with him being on his final year of his deal, this is important for him to prove it, because because the Detroit Lions could be looking at going a different direction when you're talking about a very developmental coaching staff in the back end. So what does this mean for this year's draft with 6 picks in the draft? The Lions should stick to their plan of draft who we believe best players available. There are certain things that the Lions could look to follow in this year's draft in terms of positions that they should probably look at. Up in 2014, it was the most recent one I could find, and there was a chart in 2014, each position in the draft: quarterback, running back, cornerback, safety, all these positions. And it took a look at the impact of players from year 1 to year 2 to year 3. It took a look at players that washed out, what positions had one and dones, what positions, had the most immediate impact players, which positions had the slow developing players. Again, sort of old, but it's not that old. I mean, come on, it's 2014. The Lions were in the playoffs 2014. That was a good year for us. Cornerback takes a massive jump statistically in year 2, which is great news for us as Lions fans when we think about Jeff Okudah. That's awesome for Jeffrey Okudah. Hopefully he takes that big jump, because cornerback does take time to translate. Year 2 is usually where they explode. But that means more than just for Okudah. It also means for the Detroit Lions, because while Lions have all these one-year deals, which is great for now, Corn Elder, Quentin Dunbar, it's awesome for right now. What they don't have is the players to develop behind Amani and Okudah for 2022. Because, yes, you have both those guys under contract, but 2 corners ain't going to do it. So in 2022, are the Lions going to sign, vets corners again? They could. But if the Detroit Lions want to make sure that they have young guys that can step up in 2022 and potentially find core guys, it might make sense to target at least one in this year's draft, knowing that year 1 is not usually a good year for corners. So drafting one in 2022 and expecting him to have big impact is probably unlikely. So drafting him this year, giving a year to develop behind all these guys, could be the best case scenario for the Detroit Lions. Linebacker and safety usually are extremely impactful year 1. How does that affect the draft? Well, the Detroit Lions are kind of light at linebacker right now. But if they wanted to draft a top linebacker, the odds are that and safety are going to be the most successful positions year 1. They're going to translate the quickest because it's instinctual. It's just all about feel. Linebackers and safeties, those positions analytically have translated the quickest in year 1 in terms of immediate impact. So the Detroit Lions are looking for immediate impact, safety, and linebacker. But that also means that they could maybe afford to wait till next season and potentially draft somebody based on the fact that there's a better shot those positions have immediate impact than a position like cornerback, where it could take 2 years. So it could mean the Detroit Lions could decide to wait a little bit, or at least wait a little bit later in the draft to potentially grab some developmental guys there. But if there's a position like linebacker or safety, or the Lions are saying to themselves, hey, we didn't grab much in free agency here, but we want to get help this year because this just ain't good enough, which I would probably push to linebacker in that way. Drafting a linebacker early in the draft is one of your best bets that he's going to have a great impact in year 1. Just want to stop in real quick to let you guys know that if you guys are ever interested in investing in our favorite sports teams like us as Detroit Lions fans, you guys should check out www.symbol.app. It's a way to basically invest in your favorite sports team and earn a payout when your team wins. So for us as Detroit Lions fans, now we can finally invest in something that we actually know. And with the draft coming up very soon, this is your opportunity to get involved. You guys can use promo code DOD for a $10 bonus deposit. Check it out. Here's what we saw from second round pick Jelani Tavai in his first year. Now, yes, last year was a little bit of it, but the first year. Safety position, when you have Tracy Walker, Will Harris, D. Marlowe, these guys under contract, it could mean that the Detroit Lions may wait, or at least wait in the draft and not do it early, giving these guys the opportunity to, hold it down in the safety position. For this season, they're not convinced that they want to re-sign Tracy Walker. Then they could be looking at drafting next year, knowing that that is one of those positions that usually have more of an immediate impact. However, with how much the Lions are going to use the safety position, I still think they're going to draft one somewhere. What's most likely here is that the Lions wait on safety. Knowing that Brad Holmes told us he really likes the safety position and how deep it is, it means that Brad Holmes could be looking to wait and use one of his later picks on safety this season and potentially try to develop him, knowing that he can still potentially serve an impact as a late pick. And the next year he's not sold on Walker, he could go earlier in the draft and grab a safety and kind of start to get the secondary going in a different direction. It goes back to the Lions offensive line. When you look at the right side with Terrell Crosby having 1 year left on his deal this season, Big V who has the out after this season, when you look at those situations and you say to yourself, okay, what's the future of this right side offensive line? Terrell Crosby could be that guy. You could resign him, whatever you want to do there. You could sign a different free agent next year. You could look in the draft. But offensive line, historically, by the analytics, usually take a big jump in year 2, just like cornerback does. So knowing that for the Detroit Lions, keeping Terrell Crosby, makes sense for this year. But it could also mean that the Detroit Lions could definitely consider drafting a tackle, which I would, or a guard, knowing that, hey, maybe he doesn't win that role from Crosby, but at least then we have an option for next season if he could take that next step. Because asking him to come in and play well year 1 is a little bit risky. It's actually very risky. Statistically, I looked at this yesterday. Puts it in good perspective. If you go by Pro Football Focus last season, you take the top 7 offensive tackles drafted. Only 3 of the top 7 offensive tackles graded out higher than Terrell Crosby did last season in their rookie season. And if you go back to 2019, only 1 of the top 5 tackles graded out higher than Terrell Crosby, and that came in their second year. That's including the rookie season as well. So those numbers show that, that's round 1 and 2, mainly the top 2 rounds. Even in the top 2 rounds, it's still very likely that they could struggle year 1. And that's including Andrew Thomas, who was the 4th pick in the draft of last season, who Terrell Crosby was better than in terms of grade. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. But it does show that, it's tough to draft an offensive lineman. But that second year, they usually take a huge jump. So for the Lions, if we're going by the analytics, drafting one this year, even if it's in round 1 or round 2, there's a chance he doesn't win that job and take it from Crosby, which is okay because it adds depth. And if he doesn't win that job next season, hopefully he takes that jump like he's expected to, and then that means that Crosby can go elsewhere, and then he can take over that role, and you're prepared for the future, instead of counting on a rookie to take over the tackle position, knowing that there's a chance they could definitely struggle. Receiver, though, is interesting. Receiver has a lot of immediate impact. However, what we've noticed is that they haven't jumped in year 2. There hasn't been that big jump like cornerback, like tight end. Tight end, I think, took the biggest jump. Tight end took a massive jump, which makes sense. We saw Hawkinson last year. It always is. So historically, tight ends are just great in year 2 compared to year 1. But for wide receivers, usually their first year can be impactful, but their second year doesn't take much of a jump. It's very similar to their first year, and their third year is very similar to that. So you don't see huge jumps there, which means the Lions, they could be willing to say, okay, let's draft a receiver next year and not stockpile on receivers this year because they know that, hey, he's probably not going to take a huge jump next season anyways based on the analytics. Receivers are also somewhat surprising to me because it didn't have as great a success rate as I would have thought. However, they also don't take a great year 2 jump. So again, that's why it could make sense that teams do sign receivers because it can be tough to draft them. But it also means that receivers can be found out throughout the draft. So maybe it makes sense sometimes to not always, use a top pick on a receiver because the success rate, as you can see, is less than a third in rounds 1 and 2. Should the Lions still draft someone this year? Yes. To make sure that they get the best evaluation of Jared Goff as well, or whoever their quarterback is, you got to have weapons. And they could potentially find a core piece doing that. But just by the numbers, the averages, not everything's the same, it's just averages. The averages show that for receiver position, not going to take usually a huge jump in year number 2, which is kind of a good thing for Detroit because they're looking right now like they could have 1 receiver under contract next season. So the fact that that is the case means that they could easily fill out that position next offseason, which would be great. But again, I would still draft the top receiver this year, knowing that I need to give Goff a weapon that's reliable, that I know can stay on the field and be healthy, right? That'd be great. Defensive line is a position that doesn't take long to translate. Defensive line's number of spots that could step in and help year 1. And if you look at the Lions, they have 7 guys under contract for that defensive line. So for Detroit, it doesn't really need to be a pressing need for Detroit this season. Unless you're saying we need help this year, if you're talking about development, the Lions could, based on the averages, say, hey, we're going to wait on defensive line until next season because you only got 6 picks unless you trade back. So for the Detroit Lions, where are we in 2022? That could definitely affect this year's draft. You should draft best player available. If you like a guy, take him, right? You should definitely do that. But it could point the Lions in the direction of a couple positions based on where they're going to be set for next year. Because every pick you make isn't just for this year. It's also for next year. And certain positions develop faster than others. And I know Brad Holmes, being an analytical guy, will be running through these numbers, understanding that, okay, if I go cornerback this year, there's a better shot that he's going to take off next season, which is really good for us because we're going to be light at cornerback next year. Drafting him next season could be a little worrisome, asking him to make a year one impact. Lions could be set up for 2022. They could have a nice 2022 season. They could be looking at pushing back the right direction, but how do you get this thing going in the right direction? The Lions have begun that this offseason. Now it's about where do we go from here? In free agency, I think they did a good job because it leveled the playing field, but now it's where do we go from here and other positions Lions could look at. So let me know your thoughts, comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.